Life will be lived, all the better if it has no meaning. Albert Camus, 1913 1960. In context, branch, epistemology, approach, existentialism. Before 1843, Soren Kierkegaard explores the idea of the absurd in his book Fear and Trembling. 1864, Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky publishes Notes from the Underground, which has existentialist themes. 1901, Friedrich Nietzsche writes in Will to Power that our existence, action, suffering, willing, feeling has no meaning. 1927, Martin Heidegger's Being and Time lays the ground for the development of existential philosophy. After 1971, philosopher Thomas Nagel argues that absurdity arises out of a contradiction within us. Here we have a little diagram. It says, because we have consciousness, we feel that life is meaningful. But we know that the universe as a whole has no meaning. Our lives are a contradiction. To live well, we need to overcome this contradiction. We can do this by fully embracing the meaninglessness of existence. Life will be lived all the better if it has no meaning. Some people believe that philosophy's task is to search for the meaning of life. But the French philosopher and novelist Albert Camus thought that philosophy should recognize instead that life is inherently meaningless. While at first this seems a depressing view, Camus believes that only by embracing this idea are we capable of living as fully as possible. Camus' idea appears in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus, well, let me look up that word first to see if I am pronouncing it correctly.
Sisyphus.
Yeah. So Sisyphus was a Greek king who fell out of favor with the gods and so was sentenced to a terrible fate in the underworld. His task was to roll an enormous rock to the top of a hill, only to watch it roll back to the bottom. Sisyphus then had to trudge down the hill to begin the task again, repeating this for all eternity. All eternity. So here we have a picture of Sisyphus. Sisyphus with the rock on his shoulders. It says Sisyphus was condemned eternally to push a rock up a hill, but Camus thought he might find freedom even in this grim situation if he accepted the meaninglessness of his eternal task. So Camus was fascinated by this myth because it seemed to him to encapsulate something of the meaninglessness of absurdity of our lives. He sees life as an endless struggle to perform tasks that are essentially meaningless. Camus recognizes that much of what we do certainly seems meaningful, but what he is suggesting is quite subtle. On the one hand, we are conscious beings who cannot help living our lives as if they are meaningful. On the other hand, These meanings do not reside out there in the universe. They reside only in our minds. The universe as a whole has no meaning and no purpose. It just is. But because, unlike other living things, we have consciousness, we are the kinds of beings who find meaning and purpose everywhere. Recognizing the absurd. The absurd for Camus is the feeling that we have when we recognize that the meanings we give to life do not exist beyond our own consciousness. It is the result of a contradiction between our own sense of life's meaning and our knowledge that nevertheless the universe as a whole is meaningless. Camus explores what it might mean to live in the light of this contradiction. He claims that it is only once we can accept, there you go, once we can accept the fact that life is meaningless and absurd that we are in a position to live fully. In embracing the absurd, our lives become a constant revolt against the meaninglessness of the universe, and we can live freely. This idea was further developed by the philosopher Thomas Nagel, who said that the absurdity of life lies in the nature of consciousness, because however seriously we take life, we always know that there is some perspective from which this seriousness can be questioned. Some saying from Camus, the struggle towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Albert Camus, and that's certainly true. So here's Albert Camus in this picture, and here we have a brief text about his life. So Camus was born in Algeria in 1913. His father was killed a year later in World War I, and Camus was brought up by his mother in extreme poverty. He studied philosophy at the University of Algiers, where he suffered the first attack of the tuberculosis that was to recur throughout his life. At the age of 25, he went to live in France, where he became involved in politics. He joined the French Communist Party in 1935, but was expelled in 1937. During World War II, he worked for the French resistance, editing an underground newspaper and writing many of his best-known novels, including The Stranger. He wrote many plays, novels, and essays, and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957. Camus died in a car crash, aged 46. Having discarded a train ticket to accept a lift back to Paris with a friend. Keywords: 1942, The Myth of Sisyphus, 1942, The Stranger, 1947, The Plague, 1951, The Revel, and 1956, The Fall. That was it for philosophy. Now let's take a look to some history of the world. There you go, history of the world. Excellent choice. So here we go. Let me frame it perfectly so you can have a nice read of it as well as I am doing. Okay. I think that's about it. Okay. So we're going to read about colonialism in Southeast Asia, 1790, 1914. In the final decade of the 18th century, Western intervention in Southeast Asia began to intensify, reaching a peak between 1870 and 1914, during which time almost the whole region was subjected to European and American rule. Siam. Is that the name actually? How do you pronounce that? Siam or Siam? Siam, okay. Siam, modern Thailand, ruled by the Chakri dynasty, remained the only independent state. In the early years of the 20th century, colonial rule in Southeast Asia began to come under threat from nationalist movements and the rise of Japan. Malacca Straits. British interest in Southeast Asia was driven partly by a desire to exploit the region's natural resources and partly to safeguard Britain's trade route with China, which had passed through the Malacca Straits between Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. The first step to securing the straits was the purchase of the island of Penang in the Malacca Straits, 1786. In 1795, British naval forces used Penang as a base to capture Malacca from the Dutch. The British captured Singapore in 1819, which soon became established as the major center of trade in the region. In 1824, Britain ceded the pepper trading center of Bencoolen in Sumatra, which they had established in 1685, as well as all claims to Sumatra in exchange for Dutch recognition of British control over Penang. Port Wellesley, Singapore, and Malacca are collectively known as the Strait Settlements. Britain's sea lanes were now well protected. Malay Peninsula. Let me look if I can pronounce it like that, Malay, because I'm a Spanish native, so I don't know how to pronounce some words.
Malay Peninsula.
Peninsula. Okay, Malay Peninsula from 1870s. Britain also began acquiring territory on the Malay Peninsula. In 1896, this became the Federated Malay States and emerged as a major center of rubber and tin production in the early 1900s. 5 more peninsula states were acquired from Siam in 1909, comprising the unfederated Malay states, Sumatra and Java. Following their territorial losses to the British, the Dutch faced severe challenges to the rule of the East Indies from the indigenous people. On Java, rebel forces led by Prince Diponegoro fought a bitter war against the Dutch from 1825 to 1829. Dutch attempts to extend their territory on Sumatra met determined resistance from Muslim militants in Minangkabau, finally overcome after a 70-year struggle in 1838. After this, the Dutch gradually extended their control northwards along both coasts, but attempts to take the north of the island were thwarted for 30 years by the powerful thwarted. Is that how you pronounce it, my little friends? Hello, say hello to my little friend. Let me check. Thwarted. Thwarted. Yeah, I was pronouncing it correctly. By the powerful Sultanate of Aceh. In the early 1900s, a new Western educated elite among the indigenous population of Java started to clamor for independence. Independence, oh yes. North Borneo. In 1841, the Sultan of Brunei rewarded the British adventurer James Brooke with a territory in North Borneo called Sarawak for his help in putting down a revolt there. In 1881, royal charter was granted to the newly established British North Borneo Company to administer Sarawak and exploit it for commercial purposes. Further territory was acquired, and in 1889, North Borneo became a British protectorate. Burma. Britain's concern to protect the eastern frontier of India, including opium-producing Bengal, led to the gradual annexation of neighboring Burma. Following a war in 1824-1826, sparked by Burma's invasion of Bengal, Britain won control of Arakan and Tenasserim in Lower Burma. The rest of Lower Burma was secured after a second war, and Upper Burma was gained in a third. Thereafter, Burma was absorbed into British India. Thereafter, that's a nice word. New Guinea, the first colonial claim on New Guinea came when the Dutch took possession of the western half of the island in 1828. Germany allayed to the colonial scramble for territory. Is it colonial or colonial? Let me check it up. Colonial. Colonial. Okay, scramble for territory, competed with Britain for the eastern half. In 1884, it was agreed that Germany could occupy the northeast and adjacent island chain, renamed the Bismarck Archipelago. And Britain Archipelago, how do you pronounce that? That's a new word to me as well. In Spanish is archipelago, but here is archipelago. Archipelago? Archipelago. Wow. Renamed the Bismarck Archipelago. And Britain, the southeast. British New Guinea became an Australian territory in 1906. So an Australian territory. So I'm right now in Australia, so that should mean something to me. New Guinea. Okay, French Indochina. French missions and trading bases had existed in Vietnam since the 18th century. However, the first concerted effort at colonization did not occur until the late 1850s, on the instigation of the glory-seeking Napoleon III. In 1858, a French expeditionary force captured Saigon and Da Nang. Further gains were made in the Mekong Delta, and by 1863, France had established a protectorate over Cambodia. Between 1883 and 1885, France battled with China for control of the surrounding territory. By 1887, the French had won control of Cochin, China, Annam, and Tonkin, which they merged with Cambodia to form French Indochina. In 1893, the colony was extended to include Laos. In 1896, Britain and France agreed that Siam should remain independent to act as a buffer state between their territories in Burma and Indochina. In the early 1900s, Vietnamese student nationalists began to advocate violence against the French colonial authorities. Philippines, but let me say hello to Pensamiento Brutality. Thank you, Pensamiento Brutality. How are you? And also to Laura de Plessis. Thank you. How are you reading that fast? Please go slow. Read word by word. Okay, I'll try to do that. Thank you. Do you have the link for the audiobook La Obra del Profe Bruti? Of course, I have the link, mate. Just send me your email. And I can send you the entire novel in PDF version. Yep. Philippines. During the 1890s, the USA encouraged Filipino nationalists to fight for independence against the Spanish, who had ruled the Philippines since 1565. The Filipinos, therefore, felt betrayed when the US took control of the islands in 1895, following their victory over Spain in the Spanish-American War. The nationalists continued their struggle against the new occupiers until 1905, without success, but at the cost of over 100,000 Filipino lives. Thank you so much, guys, for being back there. And please join me tomorrow for another reading session. Thank you so much. And here I will press goodbye. And I'm signing off, guys. Thank you so much.